This is DW News coming to you live from Berlin. A Super Tuesday for Donald Trump. The maverick Republican presidential candidate has won 5 primary states and he's leading in 3 more. He'll be addressing his supporters in just a moment. We'll take you right to him. On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton's camp is also having a good evening, but her rival Bernie Sanders says he's in this race for the long haul. I'm Sarah Harmon. Welcome to the program. The Super Tuesday sweepstakes continue with polls now closed in 9 states, including the big electoral prize, the Lone Star State of Texas. Republican Donald Trump claims the states of Georgia, Tennessee, Massachusetts, Alabama, and Virginia. He's leading in all the other states except Texas, where Senator Ted Cruz leads in his home state. Over in the Democratic primary, Senator Bernie Sanders has taken Vermont. That's his home state, of course, and he was expected to do well there. His opponent, Hillary Clinton, has put her mark on 5 states, including Arkansas, Virginia, and Georgia. Now, we're expecting to hear from both Clinton and Trump momentarily. We'll go live to Trump just as soon as he starts talking. Senator Bernie Sanders, meanwhile, is celebrating in a big way in his home state of Vermont. He's vowing to challenge Hillary Clinton to the bitter end. Take a listen.
At the end of tonight, 15 states will have voted, 35 states remain. And let me assure you that we are going to take our fight for economic justice, for social justice, for environmental sanity, for a world of peace to every one of those states.
Bernie Sanders speaking there earlier in Vermont. So what does all this mean? How significant is it? For some context, I am joined now in the studio by some guests. We have campaign strategist and consultant Julius Vanderlaar. I've got Charlotte Potts, a journalist and an expert on the Tea Party. And joining us on the line all the way from Texas is our very own Richard Walker in Houston. Welcome to all of you. I want to get your take on the results as we have them so far in just a moment. But right now, we hear that Hillary Clinton has begun to address her supporters in Miami. So let's take our viewers live to Miami now, where Hillary Clinton is speaking.
For all the people you can, for as long as you can. And that is why. That is why I believe deeply that if we resist the forces trying to drive us apart, we can come together to make this country work for everyone, the struggling, the striving, and the successful. If we all do our part, we can restore our common faith in our common future. That's the spirit powering this campaign. It comes from the young janitor in Arkansas who stopped buying junk food and put off getting a haircut so he could contribute to it. It comes from the disabled combat veteran from Nebraska who sent in $10. In 70 years of his life, he had never donated to a political campaign until now. You can join us too. Please go to HillaryClinton.com, make a donation, text JOIN to 47246, and let me leave you with a story that has inspired so many of us. By now, we all know what happened in Flint, Michigan, don't we? How a city's children were poisoned by toxic water because their governor wanted to save a little money. But there's another story in Flint. It's the story of a community that's been knocked down but refused to be knocked out. It is hundreds of union plumbers coming from across the country to help install new water fixtures. It's students raising funds for water deliveries and showing up to distribute supplies. It's the United Auto Workers and General Motors donating millions of dollars to help. And when I visited Flint a few weeks ago, I went to the House of Prayer Missionary Baptist Church. The congregation locked arms and sang, "We've come too far from where we started from." They're not about to quit now. We know there are many other Flints out there. communities that are hurting and need help. But we've come too far in this country to let us turn back. We're going to build on the progress that we've made. We saved the auto industry thanks to President Obama. Now we've got to create new jobs and industries of the future. We now have insured 90% of Americans thanks to President Obama. Now we've got to finish the job and get to 100%. We have come too far to stop now. We've got to keep going, keep working, keep breaking down those barriers, and imagine what we can build together when each and every American has the chance to live up to his or her own God-given potential. Thank you all so very much. Thank you.
Well, Hillary Clinton addressing her supporters there and sort of positioning herself as a savior of the working class. Tones of Bernie Sanders there, economic inequality. What did you make of that, Julius?
I mean, she's absolutely shifted her position during this campaign, and Bernie Sanders certainly has pulled her over to the progressive, to the left side of this campaign. But again, it was interesting to me. First of all, she's in Florida right now, where the campaign trail picks up as we head into the March 15th primary states. But also, she's picking up on a lot of the Obama language. She just praised the auto rescue in Ohio and, of course, in Michigan. She also talked about health care reform. So I think she's tapping into the same voter bloc that Barack Obama was able to mobilize.
All right, Julius, I think we've got some news now coming in from Texas. We want to bring in Richard Walker. He's live in Houston. Richard, news coming in from Texas. What do you got for us?
Because what's at stake, my friends, is not just the future.
Yeah, that's right, Sarah. Just in the last few minutes, the U.S. News networks have started calling the Texas primary for Ted Cruz, the senator, of course, from Texas, and by a very wide margin, about 39% to 28% for Donald Trump. So that's actually a very strong result for Ted Cruz here in his home state, at the top end of the predictions in the polls in the last few weeks, and giving him very much the kind of legitimacy that he needs to continue on in this race as the Republican Party looks and hopes that the field is going to narrow a little bit to sustain or to mount a stronger attack on Donald Trump. Ted Cruz has gained the legitimacy that he needed. And also, he may be looking at a win in the state of Oklahoma, so perhaps bagging another state in addition to his home state. That would also be a major result for Ted Cruz.
Is it safe to say Ted Cruz is still on a viable path to the White House then, given that result in Texas?
Well, that's a question, of course. I mean, winning his home state is, of course, pretty much the minimum that any candidate should want to achieve. So, yeah, it's questionable whether this actually opens up a path to the nomination for Ted Cruz. But that's what's happening with all of these with both of these secondary candidates, rather, between Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. Each is saying to the other, I'm the one with the better path to the nomination. You should get out of the race. And that could simply continue the deadlock that has been hampering the Republican Party. That Donald Cruz could sail to the nomination with about a third of the votes, just because the rest of the field is so divided.
All right, Richard Walker there for us from Houston. Thanks so much for that. You know, Charlotte, Ted Cruz, he is not popular within his own party. Lindsey Graham said, you could shoot him on the Senate floor and no one would indict you. Why do Republicans in the Senate hate Ted Cruz so much?
Well, he's pretty much the political no-sayer. He's been vetoing every bill he got the chance to veto. And, he established himself as a political outsider who really came in after the Tea Party became popular in 2009 with that anger against the government. And he has, as a politician, really carried that anger into the Senate.
Speaking of anger, I mean, Donald Trump has picked up on anger, and it's really worked for him. Why did it work for Trump and not for Cruz?
That is hard to say. I mean, right now, we're looking at Texas, you mentioned it, and you were looking at the anger in the South. And when we look at Georgia and some of those other states, exit polling suggests that people are just highly frustrated with the establishment, especially with Republican politicians. And again, Cruz has been depicting himself as an outsider candidate, as you just mentioned, but I mean, not closely to the extent that Trump has in the past 6 months. So I think Trump has tapped into this anger the most of all those candidates, and I think he'll continue to do so. I mean, he's sweeping the table as we speak right now on Super Tuesday.
Let's talk about the Republican candidate who hasn't won anything so far, Marco Rubio. Is he still viable?
Well, it's hard to say. I think now with Cruz winning Texas, it's a necessary win, how we just heard from Richard Walker in Texas as well. For Marco Rubio, it's kind of a setback, to be honest. He really needs to have a strong win in one of the next states. Otherwise, he's always going to be second, and he's not going to come out as a clear frontrunner tonight.
Kind of a setback. That seems rather mild. What do you think, Julius?
Absolutely. One of the main issues is going to be for Rubio, he has to win Florida on the 15th. That is do or die for him. At the same time, the rules kind of change. It turns into a winner-takes-all contest after this. So as the Republican field continues to be fragmented, if it continues to be split up, the delegates just not going to add up for any of those candidates.
Well, he's speaking there in those pictures in Broward, Florida, in his home state. You know, we're going to have to wait to see what happens in Florida, but he's given up his Senate seat. So if this doesn't work out, he's out of a job. Or is he? Could he be a viable VP?
Well, I think it depends really on the presidential nominee of the Republican Party. Chris Christie endorsed Trump last week, and the two of them really came on stage kind of showing, seeming very close to each other. Yeah. So he might be a possible VP. I'm not sure about Marco Rubio.
Well, let's pretend Trump gets the nomination. Listening to the debate last week and listening to the last week on the campaign trail with some of the most negative attacks that we've seen all season, it is hard to imagine that any of those guys would stand next to Donald Trump as he takes the oath of office. And again, I think it's also a question of demographics. You know, where would the Republican nominee have to win? Is Marco Rubio going to be a viable vice presidential option for that? But again, a long way till we get to that point in the campaign.
The night is young, the race is young. Let's go back to Richard Walker in Texas. Richard, standing there in Houston, have you heard any reaction from Trump's people to this victory call for Cruz here?
As usual with these things, it takes a while, and it may well be that Mr. Trump and the campaign here are waiting to see if any other states are going to be called.
Having a little bit of trouble hearing you there, Sarah, but just one little tidbit from here. We just had the crowd here watching some of the analysis on the U.S. domestic networks, and one of the analysts there just talking about this not looking like a very good night for Marco Rubio, and there was a huge cheer here at Camp Cruz, because of course that is the major rivalry between those two sort of second-tier candidates, both of them hoping to be the ones to consolidate the field and take the fight to Donald Trump. People here at Ted Cruz's rally will be saying he's the man who's proven tonight he has the strength in his home state and the strength in other states to consolidate the field and to take on Donald Trump on a national level.
Speaking of Donald Trump, how big of a loss is it for him to lose Texas? He's won so many other states tonight, at least according to projections.
Seriously, as they try to figure out if there's any way to stop him getting the
No, I think it's not necessarily a huge blow to him. I mean, he could potentially win every other state apart from Texas. But the margin of the victory would be quite striking if 39 to 28, which is currently what is predicted. If that does bear out to be the case, I think that does look like a certain amount of weakness compared to the usual numbers that Donald Trump gets. But I think it's pretty hard to paint this as a failure for Donald Trump if he does manage to sweep virtually every other state. I think it will be interesting, though, if Ted Cruz does manage to pip him in Oklahoma. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that race in the hours ahead.
Richard, has there been any official reaction to Texas being called for Cruz?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Sarah?
Has there been any official reaction to Texas being called for Cruz from Trump's people?
She sounded very much like a general election candidate at this point.
Well, we're going to be hearing from Ted Cruz himself soon. Donald Trump is expected to be giving a press conference soon. Marco Rubio has already been speaking. So, yeah, we'll see what Ted Cruz has to say, obviously coming up in the next hour or so.
All right, Richard, thank you so much. Well, let's go back to Donald Trump. He's been the man of the hour of the last couple of hours. Can you explain this Donald phenomenon? Because no one thought 6 months ago that we were going to be sitting here on Super Tuesday talking about Donald Trump winning almost everything.
So I think the voters that I've talked to last year and in recent weeks, they've always said they like him because he's so authentic. They like him because he's a good businessman, and they believe that he can really turn the country around. That kind of narrative didn't work for Mitt Romney in 2012, but it works for Trump now. He's a political outsider, and they say he is so rich as a billionaire that he can't be bought, and they really want to get corruption out of the system. So those are kind of the ingredients that make him successful at the moment.
What do you think?
Well, remember the 2008 presidential campaign when Barack Obama was up there speaking about hope and change and inspiring a country. And now compared to the 2016 cycle. Again, I think there's still some uncertainty among some of those voters out there with regard to the economy. Some people haven't benefited as much from all those jobs that were created by the Obama administration. And I think that frustration sort of plays out. And they're looking at Congress. Congress has terrible approval ratings. They're looking at the establishment. They're super frustrated. And so Trump comes in as the outsider who has, at least supposedly, built this empire, has a tremendously and huge, as he says, company, making a lot of money. So people looking at that saying, I want a piece of that. The establishment has been working. Let's give Trump a try.
Let's talk about demographics for a minute here. Shifting demographics in the U.S. are playing a role in this election. Charlotte, how do you see this effect playing out?
Well, especially for the Democrats, I think Trump has already alienated minorities so much that they are not going to turn out in high numbers for the Republicans anyway if he becomes the nominee. Though it might make them turn out for the Democrats to choose a viable alternative. 30% of non-white voters are going to make up the electorate in this general election, or even more, meaning African Americans, Asians, Latinos. And this is important for Hillary Clinton especially. So tonight was very successful in that regard for her because African Americans showed up in pretty good numbers in the South and supported her. They had traditionally supported her husband, Bill Clinton, and I think that that's one of the successes she can celebrate tonight.
Now, Sanders said this evening that his campaign is about transforming America, not just electing a president. And he is kind of an interesting candidate. He's rather on the old side. He's Jewish. He calls himself a socialist. Do you think his candidacy was in any way groundbreaking or a change to the American political system?
I think he's already changed a lot. I mean, remember where the race started out. And remember, the progressive policies that he's injected into this race. So there's a lot happening already, and Hillary Clinton, again, shifted much further to the left than I think she would have liked to. And I think it's good for her. She's battle-tested, and she's moving ahead. But at the same time, Bernie Sanders, I don't think he's ran a completely transformational campaign. It wasn't like the Obama 08 campaign. I do want to point that out, where there was a true movement for change. Again, at the same time, looking at the coalition of Bernie Sanders voters, he's got the young vote. He does bring out a lot of those young voters. You see it in the donations. He's raised over $40 million US dollars just in the first quarter of this year. So the momentum is there. The question is going to be, can he transform it into electoral votes? And most importantly, can he transform it into delegates? And I think that's been pretty clear tonight that there's going to be a big struggle for him to be able to keep up the nomination fight.
Yeah, speaking of the nomination fight, Clinton addressed her supporters. We heard earlier. We want to go back and give our viewers who are just turning in a chance to listen to what Clinton said to her supporters at that rally in Miami.
Thank you all so much. What a Super Tuesday. All across our country today, Democrats voted to break down barriers so we can all rise together. And I am so delighted to be here with you in Florida.
Well, Clinton was once seen as the all but inevitable Democratic nominee. She got kind of a surprise challenge from Sanders. Does he have a real shot here?
I mean, remember 2008 again. She was also seen as inevitable back in 2008. And
it's sort of her curse, isn't it?
It sort of is, but I think she's learned from her mistakes. Remember, Iowa caught her completely by surprise. And then remember, Iowa this time around. She's built an organization that's here to last. I think she's invested heavily in a ground game that's so key to winning a presidential election. She's a very disciplined candidate. And so I think she's making all the right moves. After New Hampshire, there wasn't a big staff shakeup. They stuck to the plan, stuck to the strategy, and I think it's paying off right now.
A lot of people have accused Hillary of flip-flopping, of changing her mind on important things, gay marriage, for example. Do you think she's moved past that now as she starts to pick up all of these states? I think, are we at 4 or 5 states now?
Right. I mean, happy to chime in. I think she is moving past that. And I think when you look at what she's saying out there right now, she's already completely turning the focus on Donald Trump because it consolidates her base. I think you need that anxiety factor. I think you need someone, you need the boogeyman out there to turn out the Democratic base and to sort of consolidate the field. And that's exactly what she's doing. It seems to be working.
Donald Trump is an effective boogeyman, and the Republican Party leadership hasn't exactly been swift to embrace him. Are they going to have to change their tune now, Charlotte?
They actually might, yeah. They've been very, very keen on keeping him away from the nomination, and the establishment of the Republican Party has always really put an effort into him not becoming the nominee. They might have to change course now. They might have to jump on board and try to somehow wiggle around his campaign or kind of put it in the right direction, yeah.
What do you think?
And you know, there is tremendous potential for absolute disaster behind that strategy, right? I mean, he is sort of consolidating angry Republicans, angry people who are angry with the establishment. Now imagine now the party, the grand old party, the Republicans sort of going out there attacking Donald Trump. This would be his best argument to the base to say, look, this is what's always happened. Now they're coming after all of us. They're attacking you for being part of my campaign. They're attacking me, and they're attacking us outsiders. So if that happens, I think he's just going to shore up more support. So you got to go after Trump, but I don't think anyone's found the right poison yet.
Interesting.
Maybe Clinton will.
Maybe it'll be Clinton. She's certainly hoping so. Donald Trump is actually getting ready to speak in Palm Beach, Florida. We're going to go ahead and pull those pictures up now for our viewers. We're waiting for him to begin his address, but we'll go ahead and start watching the stage so we can get right in the moment he starts speaking. You know, do you think the Republican Party is still got their money on Rubio, or is Trump looking more and more inevitable?
I think Trump, they are now counting on Trump a little bit of becoming the nominee. They've tried a lot to push Rubio in the right direction, but he just doesn't seem to gather that excitement. You know, Rubio is strong with more educated urban people, and Trump really has gathered in these primaries and caucuses the more rural vote, the less educated people, those who are angry and frustrated, how we just said. So the Republican establishment is now looking for strategies on how to deal with the candidate Trump.
What do you make of Republicans who say, if it's Trump, I'd vote for Clinton because otherwise the Republicans are going to lose all the midterm elections in 2 years? Do you think there's some validity to that?
I do think there's some strategic voters out there. I do think that a presidential choice is a very profound thing for people to do. So I don't think they're going to be voting strategically with regard to midterm elections. I think they're taking this vote very seriously. And again, remember 2008. Remember the day John McCain picked Sarah Palin and sort of put the whole country in jeopardy to imagine what might have happened if Sarah Palin would have taken the Oval Office. I think people, once we, and again, it is March 1st. We're still far away from Election Day in November. So people are going to tune in now. They're going to see Trump, and they're going to say, is this really what we want? So I think there's tremendous potential for Trump to implode. Again, you have to look at it. He's attacked the Pope and a former president the same week. He didn't implode after that. But the question, of course, becomes when does he implode, and what's going to happen after?
And I think one important thing to add is that what you said before, Clinton is already looking ahead to November, and she's really planning very strategically on how she might be able to attack Trump. Bill Clinton has suggested to be very rigorous on that and to really figure out his weak spots and to go after him very concretely. So we'll see how she will adapt that strategy.
All right, let's go back to Richard Walker in Texas, standing by in Houston. Richard, we have been waiting for Trump to start talking for well over half an hour. Where is he? Is he lost?
Beyond just the wins, you start to look at the delegate math and you start to look at delegate projections.
Sarah, unfortunately, having a bit of trouble hearing you again, but one thing to report from here, a big cheer, of course, going up just as news came through that various U.S. networks calling Oklahoma for Cruz. Now, that is really quite a win for Cruz. That was, it was really not predicted in the most recent polling to come anywhere near winning Oklahoma. So I think in addition to winning his home state here in Texas, Ted Cruz can now say, look, I'm actually strengthening in other states too. And that, again, underlines his argument that he is the man to take the fight to Donald Trump, and that it should be someone like Marco Rubio and John Kasich, Ben Carson, of course, the other candidates we're not talking about quite so much tonight, that it should be up to them to start dropping out at this point.
Does that Oklahoma win explain why Donald Trump has not yet taken the podium?
You have Vermont, where we can't call it yet. Still too much.
It certainly could, but often these speakers want to make sure that they hog the limelight, so he might have been waiting for Marco Rubio to finish, of course. Yeah, I mean, he certainly won't be too happy about losing Oklahoma. But if he does turn out just winning 9 out of 11 states tonight, that still makes him far and away the front runner in this race. And the fact that he's moved on to Florida, turning his fire on Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, a man who desperately needs to win Florida, that is also a sign of his confidence in this race.
All right, Richard Walker, thanks for bringing us up to date from Houston. Well, we waited and waited, and he never showed up. Let's sum up what we do know at the moment. Republican Donald Trump, nowhere to be seen at the podium. He has claimed, though, the states of Georgia, Tennessee, Massachusetts, Alabama, and Virginia. He's leading in all the other states except for Texas and Oklahoma, where Ted Cruz is predicted in the Democratic race. Hillary Clinton projected to take Virginia and Georgia, Bernie Sanders in Vermont. Charlotte Potts, Julius Vandelar, I thank you both so much for coming in and being my guest today on DW. We'll see you soon, guys. Stick around.